everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know we like to dig into the science stuff, and this time we're talking about something I know you're all interested in, and that's aging.
Ah, yes, aging.
And specifically how our genes are tied into it all.
Right, right.
So we've got an awesome chapter from this book on aging, and it's pretty dense.
It is. It's a lot to take in for sure, but really interesting stuff.
So get ready, because this deep dive is going to take us deep into the world of DNA and what makes us, well, us.
And why things eventually stop working the way they used to, as we get older.
Right. So it actually starts off with this really cool analogy about a city.
Yeah, they talk about Hampi.
Hampi.
It was this really vibrant city in India, but now it's just ruins. It's a really good way to illustrate how when systems break down, like in a society, things start to fall apart.
I see. So they're making a connection between a city and, like, our bodies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like a city needs its infrastructure and leadership to keep running, our bodies have all these systems working together to keep us going, too.
But in a city, you have, like, a mayor or somebody who's calling the shots. What about our cells? I mean, who's in charge there?
Well, that's where genes come in. All that DNA packed inside every single cell. That's like the command center.
So my genes are doing a lot more than just determining if I have my mom's eyes or my dad's, whatever.
Yeah, your genes are way more than just your hair color or your height. They're the instruction manuals, the blueprints that tell your body how to build and run everything.
Oh, wow. So they're basically the boss.
They're calling the shots, that's for sure. And the workers that carry out those instructions are proteins.
Wait a minute, proteins? I thought those were just for, like, building muscles.
That's what a lot of people think, but actually, proteins are involved in just about everything your body does. They help your cells communicate, fight off infections, even form memories.
Wow, okay, proteins are a lot more important than I thought.
They really are. So every time your body does something, it's proteins following the instructions from your genes. Pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. So tell me more about DNA. It's a pretty complex molecule, right?
It is. But picture it like a twisted ladder.
A ladder.
Yeah. The rungs of this ladder are these chemical building blocks called bases, and they act as a code, kind of like a secret language.
Interesting. So that twisted ladder shape, that's how all that information gets packed in there.
Exactly. Plus, that structure makes it really easy to copy, which is super important when cells divide.
So that's how we end up with, like, trillions of cells with the same DNA, right?
Oh, got it. It's a brilliant system for making sure every cell has all the instructions it needs.
Well, that makes sense. But how do we go from that DNA code to actual proteins? I mean, they're totally different things, right?
You're right. It's like translating from one language to another. And that's where RNA comes in. You can think of it as a temporary copy of a gene's instructions.
Oh, is that what they use in those new mRNA vaccines for COVID?
Yes, that's exactly it. Messenger RNA, or mRNA, carries specific instructions for making a protein. And those vaccines basically just gave our cells the instructions to make a piece of the virus so our immune system could learn how to fight it off.
So it's like our cells became little virus factories.
Kind of. They made just enough of the viral protein to trigger an immune response, but not enough to make you sick.
Pretty clever. And that's all thanks to this process of going from genes to proteins.
Right. And there's another key player in this process called a ribosome. They are like tiny factories inside our cells that read the mRNA instructions and assemble the proteins piece by piece.
So ribosomes are like the construction workers?
Exactly. They take those instructions and put the building blocks together in the right order to make all the different proteins our bodies need.
It's crazy how much is happening inside our cells that we never even think about.
It really is. And here's another mind-blowing fact. Once the protein is made, it folds itself into a very specific shape.
Wait, it folds itself? It's not like pre-folded.
Nope. The order of the building blocks determines the final shape. And that shape is crucial for the protein to do its job properly. It's like a long chain that becomes a hook or a spring. The shape gives it function.
Wow, so it's like origami but on a microscopic level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this makes me wonder about something.
What's that?
Well, if genes are like the blueprints, does that mean they determine everything about us? What about the environment or the choices we make?
That's a great question. It can't all be just our genes, right?
You're right. It's not just the genes themselves, but also how they are controlled. There are these regulatory regions that act like switches, turning genes on or off, or telling them how much protein to make.
Oh, so it's not like a dictatorship where genes are just barking orders.
More like a democracy. DNA provides the basic plan, but your cell's needs and its environment have a say in which genes are active and how they are used.
I like that analogy. So our genes and environment are constantly interacting. It's not one or the other.
Right. But here's where things get interesting and where aging really comes into play. What happens when those blueprints, that DNA, starts to get damaged?
Oh, you mean like mutations, right? Like typos in the genetic code.
Exactly. Now, some mutations are harmless and some can even be beneficial. That's how evolution happens. But some mutations can cause serious problems. They disrupt the careful balance inside our cells.
And that's how we get diseases and ultimately why we age, right?
You got it. Too much damage and the systems start to break down, just like in that city analogy. And cancer, that's a classic example of cells going rogue. Their instructions got scrambled, and now they're multiplying out of control.
It's kind of scary to think about all the things that can mess with our DNA.
Well, yeah, it is a little bit. And this chapter goes into some fascinating stories about the scientists who first figured out how these mutations happen.
Really? Like what?
Well, there's this story about a surgeon way back in the 1700s who noticed that chimney sweeps were getting a specific type of cancer.
I think I've heard of that. It was one of the first clues that things in our environment could actually cause cancer, right?
Exactly. And then there's this guy, Herman Mueller, who did all these crazy experiments with X-rays on fruit flies. He proved that radiation could mess with DNA and cause mutations. It was a huge discovery, and the book talks about his crazy life, too, like he was this big supporter of eugenics and had to flee both Nazi Germany and de-Stalinist Russia.
Wow, what a life story.
Yeah. And we can't forget Charlotte Auerbach. She discovered that chemicals could also cause mutations.
Oh, right, like mustard gas, right?
Exactly. She was working during World War II. Imagine the lab conditions. But her work was crucial in understanding the dangers of chemical mutagens.
It's amazing and also kind of scary how vulnerable our DNA is to all these things, just out there in the environment.
Right. But here's the good news. Our cells have developed some pretty ingenious ways to fight back. They have these amazing repair mechanisms that can fix those genetic typos.
Oh, so it's not all doom and gloom. Our bodies have ways to protect themselves.
Absolutely. And there's some truly groundbreaking discoveries about these repair mechanisms highlighted in this chapter. Like, do you know there were husband and wife scientists who made major breakthroughs in this field?
Seriously, husband and wife. That's amazing. Tell me more.
Well, they were named Dick and Jane Setlow, and they discovered something called thymine dimers.
Thymine dimers?
Yeah, it's a specific type of DNA damage caused by UV light, like from the sun. Yeah. And what they found was that cells have this incredible way to repair those dimers. It's called excision repair.
So it's like a tiny team of mechanics in each cell constantly patching things up.
That's a great way to put it.
That is incredible. It's not every day you hear about a husband and wife team making such groundbreaking discoveries. Their work really is fascinating, and, it makes you realize just how much is going on inside our bodies that we're completely unaware of.
It is. And get this, another scientist named Aziz Sankar discovered a totally different way to fix those same thymine dimers.
Whoa, 2 ways to fix the same problem.
Yep. Like having multiple backup systems in place just to make sure our DNA stays in tip-top shape.
Wow, that really shows how important this DNA repair process must be, right?
Exactly. And that's just the beginning. There's so much more to uncover about these incredible repair mechanisms and how they keep us going. There's this Swedish scientist, Thomas Lindahl, and he was studying DNA stability, and, well, he found out that even water can damage our DNA.
What? Seriously?
Right.
Water? But we need water to, live. It can actually mess up our genes.
It's true. Lindahl figured that our DNA goes through something like 100,000 changes every day from all sorts of things.
100,000?
Yeah, and that includes damage from water. It just shows how good those DNA repair systems have to be. I mean, without them, forget it.
So we're talking about a constant battle going on inside our cells to protect our DNA, huh? It's like a never-ending repair job.
Pretty much, yeah. And this chapter also mentions something called double-strand breaks.
Double-strand breaks.
Yeah, those are worse than just a few damaged bases, Think of it like taking a sentence and chopping it in half and then just sticking the pieces back together randomly.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster. Could that lead to cancer?
It could, yeah. But luckily, cells have a way to deal with this. They use the other chromosome as a template to guide the repair.
The other chromosome? Oh, right. We have 2 copies of each, don't we? It's like having a backup.
Exactly. So even if there's a double-strand break, it's not necessarily game over.
That's good to know. But even with these repair systems, nothing's perfect. There are still going to be some mistakes, right?
That's right. Even when cells copy their DNA, they don't always get it 100% right. It's like When you try to copy a really long text and you accidentally miss a word or, put in an extra letter or something.
So there's still a chance for errors to creep in, even if everything's working as it should.
Yep, but thankfully, there are systems in place to catch those errors too. Paul Mudrich, another scientist, he figured out how cells recognize and fix those little copying mistakes.
It's amazing how much we've learned about DNA repair. Makes you realize how complex our cells really are.
It does. And the scientists who made these discoveries, well, their work was so groundbreaking that they actually won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry back in 2015.
Wow, a Nobel Prize. So that proves how important all this is. But the book also talks about, what happens if these repair mechanisms aren't working right. Like, it can have serious consequences.
Oh, definitely. Faulty DNA repair is linked to a lot of different types of cancer. For example, there are mutations in a gene called BRCA1, and those are known to increase the risk of breast and ovarian cancer.
So something tiny like that goes wrong, it can have a huge impact on our health.
It can. And it's not just cancer either. Problems with DNA repair can also lead to premature aging.
Really? So it's tied to how fast we age, too.
It seems that way. There's this condition called Cockayne syndrome. People with this disorder, they have defects in their DNA repair machinery. And because of that, they age a lot faster than normal and often don't live as long.
Wow. That's really sad. But it really emphasizes how important DNA repair is, not just for preventing damage, but for our overall health and how long we live.
Absolutely. These repair mechanisms are like the guardians of our genome, always working to keep things running smoothly. But wait a minute, didn't we say earlier that some DNA damage was actually a good thing? Like, it helps drive evolution.
Yeah, that's right. So which is it? Is DNA damage good or bad?
Well, it depends on what kind of cells we're talking about. You see, mutations in germline cells, the ones that make eggs and sperm, those can get passed down to the next generation. And over time, those changes can lead to evolution. But mutations in the cells that make up our body, our somatic cells, those are the ones that can cause trouble.
Okay, so it matters where these mutations happen. Makes sense. But going back to DNA repair for a second, this chapter mentions something called the DNA damage response. Is that like an alarm system inside our cells?
That's a good way to put it. It's like when a cell senses a problem with its DNA, it sets off this whole chain of events.
And that's a good thing.
Well, it can be. It kicks those repair mechanisms into gear. It can even stop the cell from dividing for a while, to give it time to fix the damage.
So it's like a well-coordinated response team, right? Everybody jumps into action to solve the problem.
Right. But sometimes the response itself can actually be worse than the original damage. It's like calling the fire department for a small kitchen fire and they end up flooding your whole house.
Oh, no. That doesn't sound good. So what happens then?
Well, one thing that can happen is that the cell goes into a state called senescence. It basically means that it stops dividing.
So it's like the cell is putting itself into retirement. But isn't that supposed to be a good thing, to stop those rogue cells from dividing?
Well, in the context of cancer, yes. But when lots of cells go into senescence, it actually contributes to aging.
Oh, I see. So it's like the cell is sacrificing itself for the greater good, but too much of that can have negative effects on the body as a whole.
Right. And sometimes the damage is so bad that the cell is basically forced to commit suicide. That's called apoptosis.
Whoa, cellular suicide. It's a kill-or-be-killed world inside our bodies, huh?
In a way, yeah. But it's actually a vital protective mechanism. It's better for one damaged cell to self-destruct than for it to potentially turn cancerous and harm the whole organism.
It's pretty incredible how our bodies are constantly making these life-or-death decisions at the cellular level.
It is. And this chapter also talks about this protein called P53. It plays a really key role in this whole DNA damage response.
P53.
Yeah, it's often called the guardian of the genome.
The guardian of the genome.
Because it's so important in regulating how cells respond to damage. It can activate repair pathways, stop cell division, even trigger that cellular suicide we were talking about.
So it's like the cell's ultimate decision maker when it comes to DNA damage.
Pretty much, yeah. And almost half of all cancers have a mutation in the P53 gene.
Wow, really? That shows you how important this P53 thing is.
It does. And it brings us to this really interesting paradox. Why don't larger animals like elephants with way more cells get more cancer?
That's a great question. I mean, you'd think more cells would equal more chances for things to go wrong.
You would, right. But that's what's called Peto's paradox. This epidemiologist, Richard Peto, he noticed that animals like elephants and whales, they don't seem to get cancer any more often than smaller animals, even though they have way more cells.
So what's their secret? Do they have some kind of superpower against cancer?
Well, it seems that elephants, at least, they have extra copies of that P53 gene. They have 20 copies.
20 copies. We only have 2. That's a lot of extra protection.
Right. It makes their cells incredibly sensitive to DNA damage. So any cell that's even a little bit off is likely to just self-destruct.
So they basically nip cancer in the bud before it even has a chance to start.
Exactly. And makes you wonder, is that extra DNA repair what helps elephants live so long?
That's a fascinating idea. It makes sense, right? If your cells are better at fixing damage, you should be healthier overall.
There's definitely a connection there. But, it's complicated. Scientists are still trying to figure out all the details.
Well, it makes you think, what if we could somehow harness this power of DNA repair to, help humans live longer and healthier lives?
It's a tempting thought, but it's not that simple. You see, boosting DNA repair might sound like a fountain of youth, but it could backfire. In fact, some cancer therapies actually work by blocking DNA repair.
Oh, right. So messing with these processes could be risky.
It could. It's a delicate balance. We need DNA repair to work properly, but too much or too little can be bad.
So it's like trying to fine-tune a really complex machine.
Exactly. And that's why understanding DNA repair is so important for understanding aging, even if we can't directly manipulate it just yet.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface of this whole world of DNA and aging.
We are. And you know what? This chapter throws in one last mind-blowing twist.
Another one.
Yeah, it turns out that our DNA sequence isn't the whole story when it comes to how our genes are used.
Wait, what? I thought the DNA sequence was everything. It's the blueprint, right?
Well, it is, but the book talks about these proteins called histones. They act like spools that DNA wraps around.
So it's not just about the letters of the genetic code, but how they're packaged?
Right, and both DNA and histones can actually be modified by our environment.
Modified?
Yeah, like little chemical tags can be added or removed. And these modifications can change whether genes are turned on or off. It's called epigenetics.
Whoa, so it's like our genome is way more dynamic than we thought. It's not just a fixed blueprint. It can actually respond to its surroundings.
Exactly. That means we might have more control over our health and aging than we thought.
Wow, so we've talked about DNA damage, these repair mechanisms, proteins, and now this whole idea that our genes are influenced by the environment. It's a lot.
It is, and it just shows how much we're still learning about aging.
Okay, so big picture. What's the main takeaway from all this DNA stuff?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that these processes, this damage and repair, it's happening all the time inside our bodies. It's part of life, but it's also tied to aging and things like cancer.
So it's like this constant battle going on inside us, right? We need these repair systems, but sometimes they cause problems too. And now we're learning that our choices can actually affect how our genes work.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. If what we do can actually change how our genes behave, that means we have a lot more control over our health than we thought.
You mean things like what we eat, how much we exercise, all that stuff can affect our DNA.
It seems that way, yeah. Which is pretty empowering, don't you think? It's not like we're just along for the ride when it comes to aging.
It makes you want to, make those good choices and be more proactive about your health.
It does.
Yeah.
It just shows how much more there is to learn.
This deep dive has been incredible. Thanks for explaining everything so clearly.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
It's amazing how much we can learn from, just one chapter of a book.
I know, right? And the more we understand about our bodies, and hey, maybe in a future deep dive, we could talk more about those specific lifestyle things that might affect DNA repair.
Now, that's something I would definitely tune in for. Until next time.